Turns out VS Code forks are worth a lot more than any of us thought. I didn't think this is the path we were going to go down, where an editor like Windsurf would be worth over $3 billion in acquisition, but this is a weird time that we're in. For those who haven't been keeping up, there's been a surge of these AI editors that are based on VS Code, which is the open source editor built by Microsoft and GitHub. VS Code is a surprisingly extensible platform for building an editor with. It's all web-based, but a lot of the core primitives are actually really performant. And many of the UIs that we see for code editing in the browser are based on Monaco.js, which is the actual editor view that a lot of these things are using, including VS Code itself to an extent. It's the graph of how all of these things relate is a little bit chaotic. I do my best to break down the landscape of all of this, why Windsurf in particular was acquired, why Cursor exists in the first place, and how we got here. But unlike Windsurf, nobody's paying me $3 billion, so we gotta quickly make ends meet with a sponsor. We'll be right back. AI is making a lot of things easier for us as developers, but it's making some things quite a bit harder. One of those things is hiring. I don't know if y'all have put a public job listing out recently, but the amount of AI slop that you'll get as soon as you do is insane. We're talking thousands of junk resumes. Going through it to find good people is super laborious and tedious. Finding great people this way is basically impossible because all the great people have moved on and are looking for jobs in very different ways. One of the ways they do this, though, is today's sponsor, G2I. If you want to hire great engineers, there is almost certainly no better way to do it than working with these guys. G2I is a handful of different things. They're the organizers for my favorite React conference, React Miami. I actually just got back from it. It's wonderful. But they're also a video-based platform for hiring and basically an embedded recruiting team for your company to get the perfect people for your role. Whether you need in-person or remote, full-time, part-time, whatever else, they can find you the right fit. Almost certainly, and you'll be amazed how fast they can do it too. They love to brag about how quickly they get people committing. I didn't believe it when I first saw, but enough of y'all have used G2I at this point that I can totally tell you this is true. From the first interview to the first pull request shipped by your new employee, the window is like a week. It's pretty insane. And these aren't random engineers they found in the middle of nowhere. There's over 8,000 experienced engineers that have crazy histories in the industry. Many of them are actually FANG engineers, believe it or not. ShopMonkey hired 17 people in 60 days using G2I. That's crazy. If you're trying to blitz scale to take advantage of the crazy funding you just got, or if you just need one or two great engineers to help pad things out as you make a bunch of changes to your business, or maybe someone just left and you need to fill a role quickly, finding someone good is going to be miserable, especially right now. And recruiters are, oh God, you're not going to find a good engineer with a recruiter because good engineers don't reply to recruiters. We just get annoyed by them. If you want great engineers without all the hassle, check them out today at soidev.link/G2I. We'll start first with VS Code. VS Code has an interesting history. I've covered it a bit in the past in my weird VS Code lawsuits and Microsoft Fights Back videos, but the TLDR is that Microsoft wanted to make a more extensible, lighter weight editor for people who were deep in the .NET ecosystem. And VS Code was built to make life easier for those people. It was a surprisingly good editor. It quickly usurped Atom, which was the editor that Electron was originally built to make. And it quickly, very quickly became the standard editor. VS Code has very quickly become the most popular IDE in the world, by quite a bit. It has over half of the people responding in Stack Overflow, for example. When I go to an office, it's 90%. Obviously, there's still people in things like Vim. Obviously, Java heads are going to be deep in JetBrains. And of course, the C# people largely are going to be in the traditional ecosystem of Visual Studio, not going all the way to VS Code. iOS and Android have their own chaotic ecosystems. But general developers, like the average person writing code for a living, there's a very high chance VS Code is the editor that they're using. Also, unlike almost everything else in this list, VS Code is open source. Vim kind of is. NeoVim's taken over and is much more extensible. But things like Sublime Text, IntelliJ, and Visual Studio, nope. Those are very closed source things. So it's pretty cool, and I hope we can agree it's nuts that the most popular editor in the world right now is truly open source. That's a really cool thing. VS Code, I'll make the argument, biggest open source IDE of all time. But there's a risk when you go open source. Others can use that source for other things. Microsoft was trying to curb this by making VS Code very extensible. So VS Code extensions could do a lot. One of the things they could do is a little thing called Copilot. Copilot started as an innovation within the GitHub, what was it called? The Office of the CTO, I think was the term. It was the GitHub labs where they would experiment with new things. Copilot was the first autocomplete for your IDE. And to be clear, this isn't like autocomplete like with TypeScript. This is autocomplete like guessing what most likely is going to come next based on what you've written. None of the fancy features we're all used to today, but at the very least, I could write a comment that's like, if I'm writing code, like sorts list from latest to oldest. And then I write function sorts or sort list items, item array, open bracket. And it would from here be able to somewhat accurately autocomplete the rest of this function. I have a video from way back when Copilot first dropped because I was skeptical as hell because I was like, I have TypeScript, it's going to autocomplete well enough. And then I used it, got a little used to it. Then Advent of Code started, and I got my first ever top 100 in the world on it because I wrote the name of the function and it auto-completed a specific like type of sort function for a data structure. I don't remember what it was, but I remember like, oh, I understand now. It's not that this is smarter than me. It's not this will solve problems I wouldn't have solved. It's that it can carry me through the annoying parts I don't feel like typing or like recalling. So Copilot kind of took the world by storm. It fundamentally changed how Microsoft operates as a business. Copilot was originally GitHub Copilot. And since then, the GitHub has been axed in favor of Copilot being the branding for all of Microsoft's AI stuff. We'll be going back to GitHub in a bit, so remember that. But as Copilot started doing really well, it was clear that there was opportunity for more. There's a bunch of other attempts at like AI-focused editors like Tab9 that never quite caught on, but one started to do pretty well. Cursor. Obligatory disclosure, I am an investor in Cursor. I was very skeptical of it when I first used it. It took like 3 attempts for Cursor to really feel better for me, especially because the tab complete was slower than what my preference at the time was, which was SuperMaven. SuperMaven is unbelievable. What it was all focused on super fast, quick learning autocomplete. So as you made changes to your code base, SuperMaven would adjust and more quickly pick up on the things you were doing. So if you changed like in a list, you add one field to one entry, it would be able to catch on that you're going to add that to the rest, which was really nice. But SuperMaven's actually an important thing to talk about here before we get to Cursor, because SuperMaven ran into a problem that a lot of the other things building into VS Code ran into. The editor severely limited what you could do. So as good as SuperMaven's tech was, as quality as the autocomplete it could provide was, they were quickly running into limitations from VS Code itself because the extension platform, it was a bit of a mess. It was very focused on like adding a little sidebar panel. Like if I go in now, the thing that VS Code was really trying to lean into was different panels that are what the extension does. So here I have the pull request extension. Here I have all of my other extensions. And if I click this arrow, you can see the other ones I have installed. Extensions wanted to do that and language servers and not too much else, which was not enough to do like inline stuff. Pretty TS Errors is a great extension. I rely on it heavily. Oh, look, a mustached blonde Theo. Pretty TS Errors will take this horrible formatting that you get from a TypeScript error and make it look like this. So clearly this is pretty extensible, right? Like if I hover here, we get this much nicer looking editor, but you might notice there isn't enough vertical space for it. The reason for that is VS Code doesn't let you like extend this or render things traditionally. This whole piece, the reason I can't highlight text in it, it's an SVG. The creator of Pretty TS Error is using an SVG icon hack in order to sneak this whole like pile of stuff in here, which is really cool. But like absurd that that's necessary because again, VS Code was not built to be extended in the ways that we're trying to extend it now. So SuperMaven ran into those limitations and they announced that they plan to solve it by making their own editor. Cursor was already doing that though. And Cursor noticed the SuperMaven's strength was its really quick autocomplete, which wasn't yet a strength in Cursor. And as such, they decided to acquire SuperMaven to go all in on the tab complete functionality for Cursor. And the result's magical. I'll give a demo in a little bit, but the Cursor tab complete stuff is so good that I barely use the other features, especially right now when I'm working on more technically difficult overhauling tasks. I found that the autocomplete in Cursor is magical. So Cursor is the VS Code fork that brought AI to the masses. Cursor's, again, not something I ever thought I would use, much less love, but it's quickly become essential to my workflow and to the way that I build. At the same time that Cursor was starting to get traction, we get to the topic of today, Codium. There's like 3 Codiums and I always mix them up. We're talking about Codium, like with an E this time. Codium was also an extension, but it was a set of them, of extensions for better AI code assistance for code bases of all sizes. So Codium was similar to something like SuperMaven or GitHub Copilot, except it was not just VS Code based. To be fair, SuperMaven also had a Vim plugin and whatnot, but Codium always was going all in on supporting JetBrains and other things like that. Because like in a big company using Java, 80% of the devs are still on JetBrains. It doesn't matter how good you make your plugin for VS Code. If everybody's on JetBrains, because that's the suite that they're familiar with for Java stuff, you're not going to get adoption by those big companies. And for a while, that was their moat, so to speak. Their thing that they had that no one else did was those big companies all relying on Codium's extensions for AI in their editors. And they were signing these big deals. But the thing about enterprise is adoption is weird, sporadic, and for the most part, relatively slow. And it is soul crushing to spend your time talking to these big Java houses. And I know Codium wanted to be more traditionally adopted by people everywhere in their spectrum of team size to developer like career length. They wanted more people like you and me, more people who are learning to code, and for these seasoned people to all be relying on Codium's tech. And this became Windsurf. Very clearly inspired by what was going on with Cursor, they wanted to break out of the shackles that existed within VS Code, which again, despite VS Code being open source, the extension platform built into it was severely limited with how much you could change things in the editor part. So you could do fancy things in your sidebar all you want, but as soon as you had to get that into the text of your editor, the limitations were really starting to show. Even Copilot was running into issues here. So Cursor realized this and forked early. Windsurf, aka Codium, realized it later, but made the same decision to fork. Windsurf had one big focus that was different though, agentic code editing. They went all in on agents. So instead of just making autocomplete better, having the like little command K feature where I could say, change this to be more type safe, instead of doing these types of things, they wanted the fancy command I experience where you can describe something you want it to do and it can run commands, grep for files, and do the whole building part instead of just the, auto-completing as you go. It's less focused on assisting you as you coded and more on coding for you as you told it what to do. So you could also argue this is the vibe coding IDE. It's still an IDE, it's still a program you download and use on your computer, but Windsurf's angle here felt really weird to me. The focus seemed to be on devs, but also people who weren't as good of devs. It seemed to be focused on being cheaper, but also enterprise. And this is where it got confusing for me, is on one side, they were trying to make the simple to get started with editor that would tell you which command to run to start your dev environment for people who didn't know that and charge a cheaper price for it. But at the same time, they were trying to target big companies and businesses with Codium, which is particularly weird that they had both sides to an extent. They wanted to have the noobs over on the left, and they also wanted to have enterprises over here on the right. The problem is that most work, especially most of the people who are early adopters to things, live in the middle here between the two. So this ended up quickly being taken over by Cursor. I want to reference a specific YC talk. Okay, I don't actually play this talk. It's phenomenal. Tyler did a great job breaking down how sales work for early startups and businesses. And I spend way too much time thinking about this particular curve. The thing that matters in this curve is this idea of the innovators to early adopters. When you're building a new product and you need new people to try out that product, you're not going to try and get the people who don't try new things. Like, there's a lot of developers, I'd even say the majority of devs, the majority of the things that they are using have existed for at least 4 to 5 years, probably longer. They're not going to be the ones trying out your new thing. If you're talking to a company that hasn't yet made the move from vanilla JS to TypeScript, the chances are they're not going to try out your new AI editor. You have to be cognizant of how much change a given person or business is interested in taking before you can start getting adoption. So if you want to get people to try out your thing, you have to target the most willing to try new things subset of the group you're aiming for. So if we look at something like T3 Chat, I'm not expecting your grandma to be the first customer for T3 Chat. I'm expecting the lunatics like everyone hanging out in my audience right now that are excited about new AI tools that try new ones out regularly I want them to be the ones trying out T3 chat initially. So I have to position my product accordingly so that that small percentage, the 2 to 3% of all potential customers, are more interested in my product, and I make all my marketing focused on them until I win that section. And then I have to pivot the product some amount as I try to adopt more and more of the people along this curve. So in the innovator section, having every single model as early as possible, having really generous limits and transparency everywhere I can, having like fancy features like really good performance, good sync between platforms, fun stuff like if we have multiple chats going at the same time in the future, things that these like innovators want to have access to. But as we win that space, and honestly, we've very quickly gotten the like locked in AI people. We're just missing a mobile app for them. But once we have that, early adopters becomes the focus. That's going to be stuff like the automatic model selection. Then early majority, that's going to involve us building stuff like better history compression so you can just use one thread forever. I actually had a user that I was talking to yesterday who is not as familiar with AI stuff. She had been using one thread in T3 chat for 2 weeks. Just kept switching models to ones that could handle bigger contexts until she hit the like context limit because she never thought to make another chat about different topics. She had talked about like 30 plus different things inside of that thread, and she got really confused that she couldn't generate an image because it hit the input limits because it was inputting the whole chat history, not just her most recent message. Stuff like that I need to solve for these normie users if I want to get them as we go further down this like curve. But it's important to be cognizant of where you are in this journey. And I think that's one of the issues that Windsurf has run into, and Codium as a whole, is they're trying to build a product for people further down the chain. So what does this mean? Like, what's their adoption looking like? I want to ask chat, what's your main IDE right now? We'll do Windsurf, Cursor, VS Code. I'll throw in Vim, Neo, Vim, something else. But as you guys are voting, I also want you to predict in chat the difference between the 3 other results I have. Because I ran this poll on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. And I'm curious what you guys think the winner is on each of these platforms. We'll just start first. Who do you think won on Twitter? Okay, seems like everybody thinks VS Code or Cursor was the winner on Twitter. But I want you, the viewer of this video, to guess. We have 4 editors that I used in these polls: Windsurf, Cursor, VS Code, and something else. This is the poll that I created on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on YouTube. I want you to, in your head, rank where these 4 fall on each platform and get like a guess at how big the gap is between them. Like, do you think VS Code is 2x more popular than Cursor? Do you think Windsurf is half as popular as something else? It's like, get a gut feel for where you think these are going to land, because the results might surprise you a lot. We'll start with Twitch chat because I don't even know what these are going to be. Looks like VS Code is currently the winner with about 50%. Less than I would have expected, but still pretty solid. Cursor, really high up here, 24%. Something else at 16%. NeoVim at 14%. Very interesting that something else is bigger than NeoVim even, because the other polls don't have Vim in it, so I just assumed a lot of the something else was Vim. And then Windsurf at 4%. This was a very small poll of my live Twitch audience. So let's take a look first at Twitter. Fascinating results. This is with 40,000 votes. Something else ended up winning, which is crazy because initially something else was not, but it was Cursor and VS Code neck and neck for a little bit. Cursor is slightly beating out VS Code according to my Twitter audience. Windsurf under 5%, but it's higher than I expected. For a while, it had literally 0. So Windsurf's at 5%, Cursor's at 31, VS Code's at 30, something else is 35. Fascinating results. Now let's take a look at YouTube. This is one of the ones that was most interesting to me. VS Code at 50, Cursor at 18, Windsurf at 2. That's crazy gap there. And then LinkedIn. You'd probably think hard about what you expect the LinkedIn results to be before you see it. It's the business platform. Wild. 47% VS Code, 28% Cursor, only 21% something else. I would have expected this to be way higher because, again, of all like the JetBrains type people. And then Windsurf at 4. So Windsurf is somewhere between 2 and maybe 5%, probably a bit less. It is consistently around 1/10 of Cursor's adoption, according to all the places that I ran the poll. But how crazy is it that like first, second, third are different everywhere? Twitter, something else was first, Cursor was second, VS Code was third. YouTube, VS Code was first, something else was second, Cursor was third. And LinkedIn, VS Code first, Cursor second, something else third. The only thing in common across all of these polls is Windsurf losing. Kind of wild. I'm very happy I ran those polls because the results were super different from what I had expected, and I was not expecting the gap there to be so big. And that leads us to the important question, the thing we're all here for. Why the fuck did OpenAI buy Windsurf? The purchase hasn't gone through just yet. OpenAI agreed to the price. OpenAI's agreed to buy Windsurf for about $3 billion. The deal has not closed, but it's looking very likely. The last raise that they had done was at $1.25 billion, which means that the investors will slightly more than double their money, and I'm sure lots of that $3 billion is going to be OpenAI stock, and who wouldn't be pumped to get a discounted rate for OpenAI stock? So I cannot imagine any of the investors being against this acquisition. Just makes a lot of sense. When you can get an easy flip like that, you take it. The only reason that Windsurf would say no is if they are seeing truly absurd growth and think they can be worth way more than $3 billion in the near future, which just seems unlikely. And since their price is so cheap and they're doing agentic code stuff, chances are their bills are currently terrifying. I would not be surprised at all if Windsurf's current costs were unbelievable. So that says why Windsurf would sell. Why would OpenAI want to buy them? Well, I'll let Ballmer cover this one for me.
Developers.
That's why OpenAI wants to buy Windsurf. Developers. The biggest risk to OpenAI, a certain company called Anthropic. I would say Google's getting up there now too, but Google's absolute chaos of, how do I describe it? Google, if they can get out of their way on the infrastructure and like cloud side, has a really good chance. That's a big if though. Anthropic's the most direct threat to OpenAI. And the biggest thing Anthropic has that OpenAI doesn't is developer sentiment. I've talked about this a bit in other videos covering OpenAI stuff, but Anthropic won with developers. If you poll devs and ask them which models they like to use the most, a significant portion, like over 50%, are going to say Anthropic models. They're going to say 3.5 or 3.7. That's just how it is. I know that because I've seen our own bills with Anthropic models on T3 chat, and they're absurd. Google showed with 2.5 Pro that you can absolutely challenge them in the model quality side. But with things like Claude Code, with things like MCP, with the advantage they still have in general tool call work, Anthropic has been preferred by devs for a while. So why did OpenAI buy Windsurf? It's the same reason they made Codex. It's the same reason they put out GPT 4.1. It's the same reason that O4 Mini and all the new models are so focused on tool calls. They want to destroy the advantage that Anthropic has right now. They want to win in the developer world. Windsurf is an attempt at accelerating their win there. Not just for Windsurf, by the way. My suspicion is that Codium is part of this too. But if the goal was to win developers, why would they buy Windsurf and not Cursor? Before I cover this next part, I want to be clear, I have no inside information at all from Cursor. I don't even think I'm currently getting the investor updates, and if I am, I haven't seen one in a while. I have no inside baseball here whatsoever beyond my own speculation, having seen how these things are going down. OpenAI did want to buy Cursor. Apparently, a while back, OpenAI approached Cursor about an acquisition. And that was one of multiple offers that they were considering. So it seems as though Cursor had multiple different choices, but decided against it because their growth was as insane as it was, and they wanted to see it through to the end. And honestly, I understand. Even ignoring the money side, if you just want to build a product that's used by a lot of people, and you look at the numbers for how your product is being used, you see that 90% of devs are picking the Anthropic models, not the OpenAI models. So you could be acquired by OpenAI, be forced to use their models instead. Now your editor is worse. Now your adoption is worse. Now you have a much worse path to success. I totally understand why Cursor would turn that down. And all the other acquisition offers probably were a joke. And when I say a joke, I don't mean like too low or whatever. I mean, it was just companies that they don't want to work at. I've seen a lot of people saying, well, I guess Google's going to buy Cursor now. No, absolutely not. If Cursor didn't sell to OpenAI, I don't think they're going to. They want to ride this out the long way. And I have a lot of respect for them for it. It's going to be quite a battle. And I think they can do it. And they just raised enough money to basically guarantee that they can do it. They raised $900 million on a $9 billion valuation. For no reason in particular, This is how much money Microsoft bought GitHub for. 7.5 bill. After inflation, about 8.96. No reason in particular, just thought that was an interesting number. Not trying to draw any conclusions, just thought you should know. To be clear, this is a very different time. Chances are, with where both Microsoft and GitHub are today, GitHub would be worth significantly more than it was at this acquisition point. But when you think about it, a Git wrapper being worth $9 billion is pretty absurd. It's just a wrapper for Git. Why is it worth that much money? So I had to make that joke. I'm sorry. If you think that number is too high, I get it. But we're talking about a company that hit $100 million in annual revenue. So that's $100 million a year in January. And they hit $200 million in March. Doubling your revenue in 2 months when you're already that high of a number is just fucking insane. This growth is absurd. And this is why companies are betting on Cursor and on companies like it, the level they are. Turns out not only is a VS Code fork worth a lot of money to investors, it can potentially be a cash cow too. $200 million a year is absurd. Obviously, the margins aren't going to be great because you're paying a subscription and then a lot of that money is going over to the AI model providers. But $200 million a year in revenue is just an absurd number, and that growth is crazy, especially when you consider models are getting cheaper. Chances are their margins are going to get significantly better over time. This valuation makes a lot of sense. So OpenAI bought Windsurf for a handful of reasons. One, dev sentiment. They want to win developers. I'll say 1.1. Cursor said no. 2, covering the spectrum of developers. Remember that diagram I drew here where I said Cursor in particular is set for this middle area, and the noobs and the enterprises aren't necessarily well served by them, whereas Codium handled enterprises well with their extensions for JetBrains as well as their focus on indexing huge code bases. Noobs, they are more in the Windsurf world for sure. And what they're focused on here at OpenAI is how do we cover not the middle, not the ends, how do we cover the entire spectrum? And this is how OpenAI thinks about it. All the way at the end, ChatGPT, maybe vibe coding tools, things like that. They haven't really invested too hard there, but the ChatGPT plus Canvas serves well for beginners getting into code stuff. You now have Windsurf slightly further up. That's people who want to download a program and work in it for real. You have Codex, which if you aren't familiar with, Codex is OpenAI's, they don't like when I call it a Claude Code clone because it was built before Claude Code. It just came out after. But Codex is very much similar to Claude Code. It's a CLI that you can run to make changes to your code base. Not only is it open source and like properly open source, like fucking Apache licensed open source, it also supports other models from other providers. Obviously, the OpenAI support is a little more native, but you can use -- provider to access pretty much anything else that you might want to. But you might notice they specifically didn't put a certain provider's name in here. It's almost like there's a certain company they built this to fight with or something. So Codex is very much like further up the chain. And then all the way at the end, the Codium plugin ecosystem. The goal of Windsurf is that it kind of plugs these particular gaps that existed in the developer tooling that OpenAI had. And that's very exciting if you want to cover a spectrum. If you want to cover all developers and you notice these particular gaps in your tooling and in your product offering, Windsurf makes a lot of sense to acquire, not because of this box, but because this and this box both are useful. And if they can have both of them, that's very good for them. One last piece to consider is the OpenAI valuation. Their last raise, I don't think it's formally closed yet, but it's about to. It's $40 billion of money raised at a $300 billion valuation. So this acquisition is going to be a $3 billion acquisition. OpenAI just raised $40 billion at $300 billion val. This means that OpenAI just gave up around 10%. It's actually a little bit more. We'll call it 12%, easy math. They gave up around 12% of their value with dilution. Because now, before this raise, if you owned 50% of OpenAI, this gave 12% to external parties, which means your 50% is now worth 6% less, roughly. So you're now at like 44%, because that's how dilution works. When you bring in more money, existing percentages, existing ownership gets diluted, so it's shrunk. So let's look at the numbers here. $3 billion acquisition, $300 billion valuation. In order for them to do this acquisition, 1% of OpenAI is being traded for Windsurf. They're effectively taking all of the ownership that exists right now for Windsurf and Codium. So if like the founders have half, their half of Windsurf is now going to become 0.5% of OpenAI. All the investors are going to have a similar conversion. But chances are this acquisition is going to be largely stock. There could be some portion of cash. Like they could have $1 billion of this $40 billion as cash. They could even do a straight cash acquisition and give them no equity, but that's very unlikely. But this is for 1% of OpenAI right now. So if you think of this purely by percentages, it's not too big a risk for OpenAI. It's like a 1 in 100 risk. They're giving up 1% of the business for this. And is there a percentage chance that this helps them a lot? Yeah. I think a 1% trade, if I could give up 1% of my business to significantly improve the likelihood developers use my products, I would do that in a heartbeat. The valuation matters a lot less when you're thinking in this way. OpenAI is giving up 1% of their war chest, 1% of their value, in order to increase the likelihood that they succeed in the developer world. That's how they're thinking about this. That said, giving up 1% of OpenAI in order to get at most 4.5% to 5% of developers feels a little weird. Yeah. The absolute baller move they could do, though, and I do think there is potential for this. This is my crazy conspiracy. We go back here. OpenAI is working pretty hard at winning over devs. Codex is a phenomenal example of that. Codex is one of the best truly open source CLI code assistant tools. And it's truly fully open source. I know the meme is that OpenAI isn't really open, but I know for a fact they're working hard on their new open source models that are going to be very open and very flexible. It seems like OpenAI is very much interested in open source where it benefits developers and developer sentiment. I think this is an absolutely crazy thought. OpenAI might open source Windsurf. Imagine if right now the value of these forks of both Windsurf and Cursor is that they fix all these shortcomings in VS Code because VS Code doesn't have the right extensibility for agentic flows, for inline code editing, for all these things. If OpenAI was to acquire Windsurf, no longer need it to succeed at making money, but their goal is for Windsurf not to print a bunch of cash for them, but to win developers over. I think they could do this. Could go either way. But if their goal is to make developers like them more and make developers more likely to reach for OpenAI based stuff over time, this is the one way I think they could beat out Cursor. And I do really think there's a chance here. Really good question from chat. Wouldn't that damage the relationship with Microsoft? For those who aren't familiar, Microsoft and OpenAI have had a very long-standing relationship. A lot of secrets traded between them, a lot of help from Microsoft, a lot of cash from Microsoft, info from Microsoft. Well, earlier this month, I saw a fun announcement. Microsoft prepares to host xAI's Grok model on Azure. Microsoft has a pretty limited set of models on Azure right now. It's mostly open ones, like Mistral's set of open source models, DeepSeek, stuff like that, but also OpenAI models and a bunch of Azure models that nobody uses. But the value of Azure right now for AI companies, including us with T3 Chat, is hosting OpenAI models somewhere else for redundancy. The only places in the world right now that you can host a model like O3 Mini, O4 Mini, 4.1, all these are you can call OpenAI's official APIs or you can use Azure. Those are your options. So why is Microsoft making their first partnership outside of OpenAI with Grok, Elon's AI company? Well, you don't have to be particularly tuned in to know about the deep hatred that Elon's AI stuff and OpenAI have of each other. Elon talks so much shit on OpenAI. This is very clearly an attempt to rabble-rouse over at Microsoft and OpenAI for Microsoft to put their foot down and say, we're doing things how we want. You don't have control of us anymore. What's really funny is that Sam and Satya were hanging out at the OpenAI office and took a photo together the next day. So I'm almost certain this is some type of bargaining, some type of negotiation tactic from Microsoft. A kind of crazy one, too. So to the question of what about the relationship with Microsoft, I think that's already long gone. And open sourcing Windsurf isn't even like, they're not even considering Microsoft in the equation when they do that. That's an entirely different like executive war that's being fought. So to summarize, I think the acquisition valuation is kind of absurd considering the user base, but I think it makes more sense when you talk about the percentage that it represents of OpenAI and when you think about the spectrum of developers and what tools they like to use and what OpenAI's actual goal is, which is to have developers love them, both so that they have a lot of developers using their stuff and also to prevent the utter chaos of Anthropic coming in and winning devs. So this is a protection play to keep Anthropic out. It's a sentiment play to position them better with developers. It is a market integration play to own from noob to enterprise the developer stack. And it's potentially a baller open source move as well. Do I think they will beat Cursor? No. Do I think open sourcing it could give Cursor a real threat? Absolutely, yes. That's everything I have to say about this one. I'm curious what you guys think. Is this acquisition absurd or does it make some sense? Let me know what you think. And until next time, peace, nerds.